Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. I'm really excited because this is one of the few queer speculative works on my list that's not depressing, and that is Love and Low Gravity by Storm Caywood. This is a sapphic romance set in space, and it was quite adorable, if a little bit short. But this is all about our school teacher, Ada, who took the opportunity to go to this, what is essentially a mining colony space station because their schooling has been very underdone, and so she's kind of fighting with very limited resources to teach these 12-year-olds who haven't actually been in school for that long. And she meets Vivian, this general store type owner, the owner of the store that sells all of the non-essential items that the miners can't get from basically their canteen that pays for everything else. And things start flying, but wouldn't you know it, Vivian has a dark past that's trailing behind her. Good old-fashioned dark past in a romance. Now, there was a lot of time in this novella spent on the settings, and they looked really cool. You had Belko Psyche Station, which was the mining station that the primary story happened on, and that was it was almost realistic in how, like, yeah, it's a super cool space station, but it also is like having occasional problems, and things are really expensive if you don't get it from the canteen. Like, there were very realistic problems on this very futuristic space station, which I appreciated. There was also Ceres, which was a city, basically another space station, essentially, but it was like a lot nicer and basically gentrified and all fancy and made to look like an Earth paradise. And then of course you had Earth and Mars, which was also colonized. There's a lot of different settings which each had like very different themes and vibes, and growing up in certain places gave each of the characters like a different view on the world, which was a really cool idea in theory, and we'll get to the in practice in a hot minute. But our romance between Vivian and Ada, they are basically like thrown together by Pax, who is probably the character I connect the most to. She's very cheery and also very no nonsense, and also has a sapphic partner, so it's just sapphic fun for everyone. And she basically plays matchmaker, and like it works. There's no one going like, oh, I don't know, and things start going forward. But then Vivian starts having second thoughts because of her dark past, and how Ada might look at her once she finds out what that dark past is. And admittedly, the third act conflict as a result of that felt a little bit out of nowhere, but I don't want to spoil anything. However, the big thing I was struggling with, and what I talk about in theory versus in practice, is it is very difficult to make a sci-fi novella, or really any speculative novella that involves world building, feel like it is complete in itself. In a lot of ways, if you have any kind of story that has a lot of world building in it, it can very quickly feel like you try to take a novel and shove it into a novella space. And that's kind of what you get here, because there's so many futuristic settings, 4 different settings that it goes into, and for not a lot of time. Like, there's a lot of talk about Mars and how it works with everything having to be underground because of the weather, but very, very little actually happens on Mars. It's more just that you need to know that that's a place you can go and live in this universe. And so much time is spent on the logistics of things that the actual romance kind of feels shoved in among the world building. Like, whenever I think about a lot of their conversations, a lot of time is spent on their childhoods and their upbringings and the logistics of where they lived. And it was really cool. But it kind of feels like there's not a lot of time spent on things and their connection outside of very logistical world-based things. One of the things that was probably stood out to me the most was Pax basically gets them both to meet for coffee, and they meet and they start talking, and of course it's an immediate connection. But then, and I'm realizing that this is quickly becoming a romance pet peeve of mine, they basically, the narrative just goes, their first conversation was good. And it's like, no. If it's the first conversation, if it's the meet cute, you gotta write it out. I need to see the whole meet cute, the whole first conversation. I need to see the trajectory of the romance and what kind of vibe we're going for from the beginning. So to have that kind of rollover, basically a summary in the narrative to move the plot forward, that conversation is a little bit too crucial in a romance to skip. Now, obviously, there are going to be conversations later on where they're getting to know each other that you can do that with, like, oh, so-and-so learned X, Y, and Z about her family, and you can, like, do that kind of thing. But, like, the first conversation, you gotta write that one out. I did enjoy the emphasis on Ada struggling with the school and not having a lot of resources, mostly because I work at an elementary school and it feels like there's never enough resources or time or a lot of other things. So that really connected with me, probably unintentionally, but there are some steamy scenes, not very in depth, like, yes, obviously it spells it out, but it's not taking a super long time. Like, this is definitely a romance, not an erotica, if that makes sense. And I know that feels like splitting hairs if you haven't read a lot of both romance and erotica, but if you have, you'll get what I'm going for. There was definitely a lot more emphasis on the romance. The ending, like I mentioned before, felt a little bit rushed. It's a romance. I'm not spoiling anything by saying they get together, like, obviously. But the last second suddenly traveling around and second guessing, but then second guessing the second guessing, but then, okay, being totally fine. Like, the resolution felt a little bit too quick for the size of the problem introduced. Now, the one thing about the ending that I really did like is that it talks about holidays. And I like the idea of what do traditional holidays look like in this far-off future world. Ada is Jewish and celebrates Hanukkah in the story, and Ada celebrates Christmas. Correction, Vivian, not Ada. Vivian is the one that celebrates Christmas. And wants to go back home to Paris to celebrate Christmas there. And so it was really cool, the whole idea of, in a far-flung future where people aren't even living on Earth anymore, like so much of the population of humans is in space or on Mars, what would holidays look like? And I really, really liked that idea. And in general, this book definitely did feel a little bit like a novel shoved into a novella space. But that is to say that I wanted to see more, that I liked what was there, and I wanted what was there to be far more stretched out. I would have liked to see the actual buildup of Vivian's past and its effect on her and its effect on how Ada views her to be a little bit more drawn out. The book kind of plays with some themes that, because Ada grew up in what is essentially the space station equivalent of a gated community, she has some opinions that needed to be, like, readdressed, reinvestigated, which that was a cool idea. But again, because it's so short, it's like one conversation, one scene, and then we're kind of moving on just for space. Space. I also did like how the title, Love and Low Gravity, is very literal, because in a lot of those non-Earth settings, they never are at full gravity. They're always just slightly less gravity. Not enough that everyone's like floating out into the ether, but enough so that, like, on the Belko-Psyche space station, they basically have to learn, like, how to low-key hop places to get there quickly because the gravity is so low. And that kind of made me giggle. But in general, I would love to see what this author can do with a little bit more space. I have checked out some of her other sci-fi work, and again, it all seems very short. So I would love to see longer work where we can really get into depth, both in the world building and in the characters, because in this one, yes, the characters definitely felt crowded out by the world building. And I get it. You got four really cool settings that you want to like get into. Like, of course, you're gonna focus on that. Just a little bit more with the romance as well. So I gave it 4 stars. Only 1 star gone because of the rushed, but in general, I really appreciated it. I really liked having a queer romance in a sci-fi that wasn't very depressing in a lot of ways. No shade to all of the other authors that have sent me queer speculative works that are depressing, but like, when you start getting a ton of them on your review list and that's all you're reviewing, you can get in a weird headspace. Regardless, if you like sci-fi, this will be an easy one to get into. However, as far as a beginner sci-fi starts, because there's so much emphasis on world building and 4 different world building settings, all with slightly different mechanics, it might be a little bit hard to get into if you have not read some sci-fi before. This one isn't super beginner friendly for sci-fi beginners, but if you like queer romance, you can definitely check it out for that. I am still open. Not quite to the point where I need to be closed yet. Not far away from that, but we're going to keep trugging along. Trugging? What did I just say? Anyway, so if you would like to send a review request, that information will be down in the description below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.